In the Unit 1C lesson, we're going to examine the problems that emerge in the Gilded Age, and they're going to initiate what will become known as 19th century progressivism. There were various problems, various corruptions during this time in American history. Urbanization, really powerful business, powerful and corrupt political parties, rural and farmers struggling, and finally a monetary instability that is going to lead to a panic and an economic crash in 1893. Between 1865 and 1900, Americans' urban population skyrocketed to 30 million people that chose to move to cities. As technology is increasing on farms, there are fewer workers needed, and so farm workers who are laid off move to cities to get jobs in new factories and in new industries. The problem with urbanization skyrocketing so quickly is it is going to bring a significant set of problems with it. Very unsanitary living conditions. If you notice in the photos here, utter crowding. People living with 5 and 10 people in 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. Cities were dirty, smelly, disease-ridden. Infant mortality rate was very high. And further, because these unsanitary and unsafe conditions led to desperation, it allows political corruption and businesses to come in and take advantage often of people who have very limited choices about where to live. The way a city looks begins to transform as well, because skylines and streetcars change what an American city looks like as we approach the 20th century. Skyscrapers allow cities to build up. It's a significant benefit for the overcrowding. It enables more people to live in safer, roomier spaces. Streetcars also help the unsanitary conditions, because the more streetcars there were that ran on electricity, the fewer horses there were. Of course, when you have horse-drawn carriages in a very crowded area, the feces from the horses, food, water, all these problems are going to lead to further unsanitary conditions. So skylines and streetcars do help to limit that. As businesses begin to boom and grow, the Gilded Age becomes sort of quintessentially about the millionaires emerging as we approach the 20th century. Over time, you have several businesses that are completely dominating American life. That leads to monopolies. As businesses and corporations grow in power, they have more ability to limit competition, which hurts consumers. The Federal Trade Commission is established to try to break up some of the power of these businesses and facilitate competition, because it's believed that competition, of course, would help consumers. Another area of corruption and of need for progressive advance is going to be regarding the question of the role of women. For years and years, up until this time, the cult of domesticity was understood and accepted. In other words, it meant that the sphere of the woman was the home. Her job was to take care of her family and to support her husband. Over time, the cult of domesticity comes into question. Women start to push for a more public and active role in life. As they do, it causes questions about what their rights should be. Should they be able to vote? Should they be able to own property? Should they be able to divorce their husbands freely if they so choose? As women want to work in factories and have more independence, it causes people to question the traditional roles that they've maintained for years. Another problem area that people hoped for progress in was child labor. As factories expand, there were areas that children were seen to be a real benefit. Usually the most dangerous jobs. If you look at the photo, there's a young boy there in the middle with no shoes on. Very tight spaces inside machines, working in small spaces because of their size meant children worked in some of the most dangerous areas. And at this time, there was no regulation on child labor. Children could be paid poorly and be put in the most dangerous situations. As women come out of traditional roles and seek work, and children do as well, businesses recruit them and long for them to work there because they're able to pay them less. America had 2 million child laborers by 1890. They worked under horrible conditions and often had accidents and death, very difficult circumstances for both women and children. Because of the problems with regulating labor, you have the beginning of the labor unions. In modern times, labor unions have sometimes a negative connotation, but originally you have 3 emerged: the National Labor Union, the Knights of Labor, and the American Federation of Labor, that emerged to strictly protect all workers, but specifically women and children as well, to be sure that workers are not being taken advantage of, that they're given enough breaks, that they're being paid. And they often use strikes. These labor groups focus on different things. Some focused on the workday, others focused on pay. But one thing they all had in common is they were willing to use strikes to try to get the attention of upper management and fight for the rights of their workers. One of the defining characteristics of the Gilded Age is the powerful and corrupt political parties. There were very corrupt political workers, powerful party bosses that had favors, would keep people beholden to them in order to exercise their power. And it really had nothing to do with who was elected. Sometimes the most powerful people in the political arena were bosses behind the scenes who were using favors and money to get their way and to be sure that their candidate won. In rural areas, because technology was increasing, it did lead to fewer farm workers. However, when the economy goes down, tariffs are introduced, the price that farmers are able to fetch for their goods goes down. This makes it very difficult for farmers to turn a profit. Many of them lost their farms as tariffs hurt American farmers. They turned to banks to take questionable loans to get them through, railroad execs offering loans. There are various things that the rural farmers are forced to do to try to save their business that often puts them in precarious situations. In 1866, Secretary of Agriculture Oliver Kelly takes a tour of the South and realizes how backwards and how isolated farmers and their families are. The technological advances that came after the Civil War were limited and often didn't go to rural areas, because you could easily supply hundreds of people in the city with electricity. It was much harder in agrarian areas where farms were often spread by hundreds of miles. So the Granger movement, or the co-op movement, pushes to help find a way to unite farmers, to have them rely on each other, to have options for different goods and services. It allows them to unite and kind of push back against what many people believed were businesses taking advantage of struggling farmers. Another problem during this time was the flailing economy. Many people believed that because America used paper money instead of things like hard money, gold, and silver, that it was causing the American economy to implode. You have an entire party, a political party called the Greenbacks, that is devoted solely to shoring up America's currency issues. You have another third party that emerges, populists. They are focused on the needs of miners and small farmers. They, like labor unions, are going to focus on workers' rights, and workers' protections. All the economic instability and struggle is going to lead America into the worst economic depression up until this time. Now, it's likely that you've never heard of the Panic of 1893, and the reason for that is because we know that the Great Depression is going to come quickly after this, which makes this seem like nothing. However, in 1893, 600 banks closed, 15,000 businesses failed, and there were foreclosures across the United States. The thing that was the most surprising about this is there were very few changes instituted. People believed that if we could just get through this time, everything would be fine. But we know in reality, it causes a lot of problems that are going to continue. This is the warning signs. These were the growing pains, the warning signs of what were coming. But people didn't take it as seriously as they needed to in order to really combat the problems and prevent what we know will become the Great Depression. So, what problem during the Gilded Age is most significant? I don't know. You tell me. But I know that there are problems across the board, whether it's business, currency, women's rights, labor rights, urbanization. I could go on and on and on. But the one thing that is certain out of the Gilded Age that we know is going to come is there are going to be people that are pressing for change and progress in all of these areas of problem. And that is going to lead us into what is going to become known as the Progressive Era in the 1920s.